Welcome back. You're looking at the mighty dash on runway 34 at Reading Municipal Airport, KRDD. It's an Orbx airport, which I've shoehorned into prepared version 3. And we are about to depart for San Francisco. Short flight, and again, we're going to try to demonstrate the capabilities of the new heads-up display on the professional version of the dash. We're probably doing something that we really don't need to do on a day like today, but the heads-up display is set up so that you can, with a flick of the switch and a change of the view here, get guidance down the runway when you can barely see anything in Cat 3 conditions, basically, and also get all the guidance you need to manually land an airplane under those very same conditions. Zero ceiling and very limited runway visibility, including rollout, including flare and rollout guidance. But at the moment we're blessed, I suppose, with pretty good weather, and so what we're doing is more by way of a demonstration of the procedures involved, at least as best I know them. The flight is going to be very, very short. It is going to take us out of Reading at the base of beautiful Mount Shasta. It's going to spin us around here. We're going to come back down on the 177, or inbound on the 357 radial to Red Bluff, where we're going to pick up J65, take that to Sacramento, and then proceed to the southeast of San Francisco, where we will pick up probably the runway 28 right ILS approach, not necessarily because it's the most appropriate, because the wind is very, very slight right now in a way that would favor the 10s, but they rarely fly in and out of the 10s in any case. And we're mainly doing it just so that you can see what an approach looks like again with the HUD. So just to reiterate from the last video where we sort of butchered a whole bunch of things, the HUD parameters are set here. You can see it's set to takeoff. The reason why it's set to takeoff and why it enunciates takeoff in the panel right here is because we've actually configured it correctly, and that is a very involved procedure, in the sense, not that it's especially difficult, but just that every single thing has to be set right, or it will fall back to a less stringent condition, and it will enunciate it, and you will clearly know that you can only use this in much better conditions. And if you're in really bad conditions and you don't get this TO, or on landing, if you don't get an A3 as the enunciation, then you would be foolhardy to blindly, literally, follow the directions on the HUD, because it could be leading you astray. But in short, what you need to do is your IRS has to be on nav. These two sources have to be on norm. You need to be tuned into the runway ILS for the approach of the runway that you're taking off from. It has to be tuned into nav 1 and nav 2. You need to be drawing from nav 1 on the captain's side and drawing from nav 2 as your source on the first officer's side. In addition, on both sides, the proper ILS course has to be dialed in, and the proper runway heading has to be dialed in. Again, the touchdown zone elevation has to be plugged in, and as you can see here, the runway length has to be plugged in. The way you access those two is by clicking on runway and elevation. Just click this again, and you've got length, and you can edit that if you want, but this is a 7,000 foot strip, so we'll keep it. And you edit the elevation exactly the same way. And that way you know that if we were in deeply foggy conditions, we could follow this ground guidance, and it would keep us straight on the center line of the runway using the ILS and the inertial reference system and GPS, presumably, and it would guide us down this runway, even though we could probably only see to about here. So it's pretty trick. Now, the other trick I suppose we're going to do is just make sure my Easy Dock is working, because it keeps quitting on me, and that is a bummer. But we are going to fly the Crest 3 departure out of here, which in an ideal world, you can see it's flying runway heading, then intercepting the 355 radial outbound, then flying a DME arc, 12-mile DME arc to Itmore, and then turning southbound to Red Bluff. In an ideal world, merely plugging this in the FMS would display all of that and would set it all up. Apparently not, though. This FMS only, when you plug in the Crest 3 departure, only gives us a heading to Crest, and that's it. So we are sort of going to improvise, and the way we're going to improvise, and maybe I've got this wrong, is we're going to fly runway heading. We are going to, once established in the climb, flip this over to 108.4, which is the VOR for RDD. Then, using this, we are going to intercept a 355 radial. Then we're going to fly it outbound, and then we are going to use the DME right here to maintain the 12-mile arc to Itmore. And during that time, we are also going to switch the nav source over to FMS1, and once we hit Itmore, while keeping an eye on the DME, making sure that it is 12 or less, then we will continue on, and it will sequence us, and we will fly down to Red Bluff, or as I keep calling it, I don't know why, but I guess it's because the designator is RBL, I keep calling it Red Bull, which is a pretty cool name for a waypoint, or a VOR for that matter. Anyway, let's do a quick check of everything else, make sure our trim is set, make sure our flaps are set. See how my levers jump like that? That's because of FSU IPC and my crappy SciTech levers. I just, before we get going, want to make sure that they work as designed. They are. Our pumps are on, our auto feather is on, gust lock is off, climb up here, our heats are on, bus tie is off, our landing elevation is 500 above field, yes, approach lights on, yes, bleeds are min. All right, so we're going to get kind of busy. I've got 5,000 as the altitude set, which is where we want to be. And I believe I've got the lollipop set here for the RDD VOR. And let me see if I have. Zip down here. Yes, VOR1, VOR2, they're both set for the moment to read the ILS. And let me just make sure I'm still all tuned up the way I need to be. I am not, because I'm not enunciating takeoff, which means that I forgot to flip back. You see? 1087, 1084, I forgot, and that's why the lollipop here is pointed this way. Let's go back to 1087, go back to nav source nav 1. Now, if you look down at our panel here, it says TO for takeoff, and if you go to our enunciator, it is enunciating TO for takeoff. And now we are right with the world. You see how easy it is to get misconfigured? Alright, with all that squared away, this is going to be our procedure. Advanced throttles. Look for 80 knots. Cross-check 80 knots. Look for V1. Rotate, pull up to 10 degrees. Hold runway heading. And then flip the very first thing we'll do is we will flip our nav 1 here. It will, once airborne, give us HSI guidance so we can fly to the correct radial, but we will quickly ditch this, and we will quickly pop up this, and we will first point the nose and the lollipop in the same direction, and then once we get flipped over, we will make sure that we are on the 355. The other thing we'll do is we will look at our DME, and we'll look for about 10.5, and we'll start a standard rate right turn, maybe with the autopilot in, because we're going to be going to 5,000. And then we will put that lollipop so that it is on the right wing of the airplane the whole time, making sure the DME is 12. In other words, we're going to be flying a DME arc, and then we are going to be looking for the 044 radial, and when we get to it, we will turn and fly direct to Red Bluff. So that's a very labor-intensive way around what should be a very simple procedure, but I don't yet know if it's even possible to plug a DME arc into the FMS. So with that, do a little reverse gumps check. Trim is fine, flaps are fine, condition levers max, power levers disc, HUD set, tiller free, flight controls set to flight, and let's see if we can make this work. And you see it's enunciating takeoff. Outcells here, 5,000 is here, heading select is there, and we don't, the heading bug is right there, so that's cool. So what I'll do is as soon as we get airborne and stable, I will engage the autopilot. I will spin the heading bug to 355 or a little bit more so that we can join or intercept the 355 outbound. I will do our nav flip and then continue on with the scramble. It would be nice to have a first officer. Okay, power set. M-top set and stable. This is offering us a little bit wacky guidance because it's an add-on airport and the runway on this one doesn't fully coincide with the nav data. And there's V1 and rotate. And we're going to pitch up to just a little bit shy of 10. These are the new controls, by the way, on the Dash Pro, and they are more sensitive and they're more precise and they're wonderful. Go gear up, clean up our flaps. We'll engage our autopilot. We'll stay in pitch hold, which is fine. Flaps are coming up, and now we will go and spin our heading to about there. We'll pop up our arc do. We will flip over our nav source. We will change our course to 355. This is very labor intensive here. And we will put ourselves in nav mode now. And actually we'll spin the heading around just a little bit more so we intercept the 355 coming outbound. That's our HSI right there. That's pointing away from the station, so that's cool. And we are all ready. Okay, now into nav mode. See, it enunciates VOR and it's going to join the 355 outbound. And you see right here how we're coming in on this. So that's what we're supposed to do. 1,000 away. Pull our props back to max climb. Make sure our flaps are up, our gear is up. That is cool. It's capturing altitude. And now we are DME 6.5. So when we get, just get rid of this, when we get to DME 11 or so, we will start our turn, our right turn, and then, oh, it's already sequencing us, so we'll start our right turn here. So let's see, 8 miles, we'll go into heading select mode, keep ourselves from overspeeding, pull back the power a little bit. 9 miles, retrim our rudder. This is what the arc is meant for us to avoid. And we are going to basically, okay, there we go. So we'll turn, and we're going to be looking at this needle, actually the back end of this needle, and we're going to be flying this arc at 12 miles until the needle hits 044, right about there. Let's get ourselves into the arc. I'm a little bit outside of it. We're basically going to fly so that this needle is always pointing on our right wing. So we've spun a little bit wide of the mark, but not too much. We're still roughly within a mile of it, which, as you can see here, gives us terrain clearance. So I'm going to spin the heading bug around. And we're going to keep it right off of our right wing. And actually I'm going to tighten it a little bit so we can come back in on our arc. So I'm going to overshoot a little bit and bring us back towards the 12 miles. Notice how now it is ahead of our wing, and again we're looking for 044 right about there. Alright, so you see we're creeping in, 12.9. When you fly a DME arc, generally you fly 10-degree segments at a time. You don't fly a beautiful continuous swooping arc unless you're a computer. Okay, 12.5, 12.4. We'll wait for the needle to catch up to our wing a little bit. 12.1, we're a little bit inside now, so let's shallow it out. And again, we're looking for, okay, there's coming up on it right now. Looking for right about there, at which point we will switch into FMS for our nav source, and it will turn us south to Red Bull, and we'll continue our climb as well. Okay, so nav source is there, and it's going to turn us. Once I put it in nav mode, there we go. And we've just executed a departure with a DME arc, ghetto style, I suppose. Alright, now we're going to spin our altitude up to our cruising altitude, which is flight level 200. And if ghetto style is too rude, we've MacGyvered it. And if MacGyver is too obscure, we've made it up on the fly. Alright, so having spun our altitude bug up and hit alt cell, we will go into IAS mode and we'll dial down our speed to about 175 and climb that way. Move our power levers back up. Retrim because we just dumped in a bunch of power. Take care of a little business. Out come the auto feather. Out come the pumps and auxes. Bleeds can go to min. We take a quick glance, make sure that the cabin is pressurized as it should be, and it is. It's climbing very slightly. We can keep our heats on. They should stay on through the remainder of the flight. We'll just, in advance of crossing 10,000, turn our lights off here while we still remember. And because I have made now 3 flights where I've either left the flaps down partway or not been able to raise the gear, we're going to do a quick reverse gumps check, and the flaps are good and the undercarriage is up and the pumps are off. And so with that, we'll cut the video here and I'll see you closer to top of descent. Well, maybe not the prettiest thing to come out of Canada, but in a certain light, over some nice terrain, with the sun cutting across it, and the wind giving it a gentle nudge back and forth. Not bad at all. We are in the new and professional Mighty Dash, and we're coming up, as you can see right here on our top of descent, into San Francisco, or as they would say on board, into the San Francisco area. This is the Sacramento River by the looks of it, and we're in the sort of fertile valley, courtesy of Orbx's newly released Northern California 4 Prepared version 3. The weather is active sky next. The clouds are by Rex, and so is the river texture. We are fat and happy at flight level 200. I've already set our V-speeds for landing, set our decision height. I see we're picking up a little bit of ice, so let's make sure our boots are on. And they are, and that's cool. Turned them on a few minutes ago, because we seem to be cruising right at the altitude where the temps are just right for this sort of thing, and we're not, ordinarily we'd be either above it where it would be too dry, or we'd be below it where it would be too warm, but we are in a happy, nasty little medium there where ice likes to make its home. Anyway, let's very quickly check our approach in FMS. We are flying from Sacramento to Archie. We'll descend to 7,000 at Archie, and then we will start our way onto the 28 right approach with a Dumba transition. Making quick note of the course. The other thing I'm making quick note of is the touchdown zone elevation, which is 13. So it's 284 and 13, and I'll show you why that's important in a second. We have already tuned up the ILS frequency for the runway, and we're listening to ATIS right now, but I can get rid of that because it's not the accurate. That's Sacramento ATIS, so we don't want that. We've tuned in NAV1 and NAV2 the ILS for runway 28 right, and we have already punched in the correct course for 28 right. We can verify that by holding on the format key, looking up right here and seeing that it's 284, holding it down again, going back to map mode, and looking right here and verifying that it's 284, 111.7, yes and yes. We can verify that this is set to draw from nav2. This is set right now to draw from FMS1, but for our HUD approach, it's going to draw from nav1. And we can look down here. That is in the correct mode right now. And again, the runway elevation we set, which is crucial, is 13, because it needs to know where the runway is in physical space. And we've set the runway length as well. We've set the glide slope, which is a standard 3 degree, which you can find on the approach plate right here, glide slope 3 degrees. And you can verify that the touchdown zone elevation is 13, and that is the correct runway length. That is a Cat 2 or 3 procedure. We're hitting Archie at 7. We'll actually be at Archie a mile. We'll be actually at 7 a mile before Archie, at which point we will pop ourselves into heading select mode, leave the FMS behind. We will then fly that till we intercept the localizer, pop us into nav mode, and then approach mode. And again, the reason why, as best I can guess from all of this, the reason why you have to be so painstakingly careful to tune the ILS into nav2 and in nav1, make sure the courses are matched, make sure the headings are synced, make sure that the IRS is in nav mode, that's the inertial reference system, and make sure that these are also drawing from the right sources, although I don't know as much about them, is for the simple reason that everything you do in the fog, your whole life, is going to be depending on keeping those meatballs centered. And when those are centered, it should mean that you are descending properly towards the runway, and in fact it's doing just that. The two nav sources with the identical ILS, I gather, and I'm not sure, but somebody can correct me, is I gather that's one of the requirements of a Cat 2 approach, which doesn't involve such low minimums, but lower than the standard Cat 1, which is usually 200 feet. And reason being, and also special flight crew training to do it, the reason being is that you've got a pilot flying and a pilot monitoring, and they should be looking at the same nav source, tuned into the same thing. But I'm guessing, and again this is only a guess, I'm guessing also that the more sophisticated autopilot electronics for auto landing makes use of two of those signals, the same signal from two different sources, to do a sanity check, to make sure that both of them are sending out the identical signals, because if they're not, it could be a sign that something is wrong somewhere. And then usually what will happen is it will degrade to a less stringent mode, to Cat 2, and it'll enunciate, and it'll say, I can't do I can't do the kind of auto landing you want, or I can't do the kind of HUD approach that you want. And basically you have to then fly an approach to less stringent minima, or go mist, or go visual, or do something. But what it's telling you basically is that I no longer have enough information to reliably present you with a safe course down. And if the choice is ever between presenting you with what looks like a safe course down but isn't, or refusing to do it at all, it will refuse to do it at all, or it will drop down to a lower mode that will be to higher minima, so that you will not be staring like an idiot at this thing, doing your level best to keep those circles lined up and to keep this here and to keep your flight director needle centered, only to discover, since there are practically there's no decision height on some Cat 3 approaches. I've got it set for 50 just because I want that call out there, and I'm just presuming that my company doesn't let us do Category 3 approaches down to nothing. But you don't want it set up so that you merely follow all these instructions here and you end up 50 feet to the right of the runway, or you end up in a ditch short of the runway, or you end up 3,000 feet long on the runway. So that more or less is why these things are designed to check themselves and cross-check themselves and then fail safe, as it were. So that's just my semi-educated guess based on the way these systems tend to work, but I could be wrong, so just let me know. So we're 4 minutes away from top of descent. I'm going to put 7,000 feet in our designated altitude. I'll hit Alt Cell, and as soon as the VNAV path indicator lights up here in magenta, I'll switch us into VNAV tracking mode, and when we hit top of descent, I'll roll off the power a little bit so that we don't overspeed. Also going to seat the passengers before we go downhill. Check our icing status. We are not icing anymore. Turn off our boots. Open our doors. And our descent checklist is complete. I've also got FTX vector in here, but I think the regions that Orbx has provide their own vector data, so that housing, that suburban Sacramento complex there, is courtesy of the region, but if you didn't have a region installed, then Global Vector, I believe, would provide that. Okay, so it's enunciating. Into VNAV mode we go. Turning towards Archie we go. And once we get there, this is going to be a fairly sporty arrival. I'm just going to double check before we get too busy that we are both tuned up there, and that our course is set there, and our course is correct here, and it is. Also going to bring our scale down a little bit here. And this is the most common arrival into San Francisco, given the prevailing winds. This is the mouth of the bay. That over there is the San Jose area, and Moffett Field right behind that cloud, where the United States housed its Zeppelins, its dirigibles back in the day, the Akron and the Macon, both of which I think were lost in various wrecks. And we'll quickly check our weather in San Francisco. We'll expect that it's probably somewhat crappy. Alright, the wind is mostly negligible, so that's fine. 3001. Again, we're going to use this as our scratch pad. So 3001. And we're about to capture VNAV. We are 54 miles away from the end of the runway, and everything is proceeding nominally. That's going to come in handy later when I'm in the HUD, because I'll be able to glance here and see what my torque is. I shouldn't have to, but I'm not yet good enough that I can get everything quite right just by feel and glancing over at my throttles, because my throttles are non-linear and lousy. Alright, assuming we're going to get slam dunked into San Francisco, I'm going to let this speed build up as high as I possibly can as we go down. Just looking at my speed trend right there. Assuming they want us to hustle. When we get below 18, we'll switch our altimeter to 3001. And in the name of getting all this crap ready sooner rather than later, I am going to turn my pumps and my auxes on and set my bleeds to min. I am going to turn my lights on even though we are early, just because I want to get everything squared away, because it gets very, very busy without a first officer. Alright, so we'll keep an eye on this, and we'll keep an eye on our annunciator on the first officer's side. The other thing we're going to do right now is switch ourselves as we just touch the barber pole right there. And we switch our altimeter over to 3001, like so. We're a little above profile, so I'll bring back some power, slow us down, give it a fighting chance, because we're now going faster over the ground than we were in cruise. There we go. And we will put us in heading select mode. We'll keep an eye on this, but we're now in pitch mode. I'm going to put us in vertical speed mode, and then I'm going to tweak the vertical speed to maintain our profile. As long as we're within the magenta line area, it is going to pretty much be equivalent to letting it follow the VNAV path for us. If we were somewhat deviated from it, we'd have to adjust, because obviously it's basing its calculations on these distances, and our distances would vary a little bit, but we're cool. And what we'll do is we will switch our nav source here to nav 1. Our ILS isn't even illuminated yet because we're out of range, but it'll probably light up right about here. The other thing we'll do is, well, I won't cancel our VNAV yet until we turn towards Dumba. I could right now just cancel the VNAV, proceed along here, and have it stop here. If I don't cancel the VNAV, in fact, it will blow through the 7,000, which is fine, and it will continue to guide us down to 6,054, etc., etc., etc. But at some point I'd want to get rid of it, because it's a little bit misleading, because at some point we're going to be following the glide slope. At some point. At the proper point. And because we've rolled off the power, you see how this gets displaced, so we will put in left rudder trim, step on the wedge, step on the ball. And you can see the DME is not changing very much, because we're basically flying parallel to the station. I actually shallow out our descent a little bit. What I'm doing is I'm adjusting the vertical speed on the AFCS, because we're 20 from Archie and we need to come down another 5,000 feet, so we're slightly below profile, which is okay because I want to take off some speed as we get closer to 10 and bring us down closer to about 210 knots. Just at the moment, I'm just going to make us a little more precise, so I'm going to pop us back in our nav mode. It'll reacquire our magenta line. We've drifted a little bit because of the winds. No, not because of the winds. We drifted a little bit because I set the heading just a little bit wonky. And as we get closer to Archie, then we'll switch back into nav mode. This is our deviation. It says we're right by 0.2 nautical miles. It's our lateral deviation. This is our vertical deviation. We're slightly below profile, but we're above all the minimum safe altitudes for the area, so we're cool. This is where some of the MSAs come into play. It's here and over here when you're coming in from the southwest. Now you notice I didn't pop us back into VNav mode. I'm just using that vertical profile deviation needle as raw guidance, and I'm just dinking with the vertical speed back and forth just to do that. I mean, there are many roads will get you to Rome. Alright, so we're 10 from Archie, and we only have to come down another 2,000 feet. And we could be as close as 7, well actually we're 9 from where we want to be, because we want to be at 7 a mile ahead of Archie. And we're below 10,000. We're cool there. Just going to set us to reduce noise, profile landing. I'm doing it this early because I don't anticipate having to use more than 50% power, which would knock it out of that mode if we do this right. If there's a go around, it'll bump it up normally. Let's do a quick scan. Cool. Landing altitude, we can reduce that to 500. There we go. Bleeds are at min. That is cool. And now we're slightly above profile, so I will nose us down a tad. And let us see whether we can pick up, as I put us in heading mode, let's see if we can pick up the localizer. Yes, we can. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually descend us, and I'm going to assume we've been cleared for the approach. So I'm going to put us on a bit more of a gentle intercept heading for the ILS. I'll spool this down to 4. Actually make it 3. And we'll now intercept the localizer. And we will arrive, I hope, at the right point underneath the glide slope, which we should. And now as soon as this needle starts to move, I will pop us into nav mode instead of heading select. By the way, to intercept using an HSI, you basically put your heading bug right on the tip of this. And there it comes, and so we'll pop us into nav mode. It grabs the localizer. I'm going to level us out here, because we can't be any lower than that yet. I'm going to let us naturally slow. I'm going to bug up our heading to 284 so that our HUD works okay. Okay, we've captured the localizer. We're at 5,000 feet. We can come down to 4,000 by Dumba because we just crossed Grr. So we'll come down. And we'll spin that down to 3,000 because we're going to do that with plenty of time to spare. There's our localizer coming in. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to pop us into approach mode. That's our missed approach altitude now. Get rid of that, don't need it. Bring down the HUD. Put in our first stage of flaps. Zoom ourselves in and we'll see that A3 is armed and we're going to keep this thing lined up. Localizer is captured, glide slope is captured. I should actually be in approach mode, so it looks like it has not captured the glide slope yet. Let's put us in altitude hold mode and see if that will then bring the glide slope to us. Down can come the gear. We're at 3,000 approaching Seepin. We're cool. And yes, it has captured the glide slope. And we have started going downhill. Bring up my next stage of flaps. This is our flight director, by the way. That's our flight path vector. There's the bridge. And I'm going to cheat with my power. I'm going to get us to what I know to be a decent approach power and just settle into it. Get ourselves stable because we're still a little bit fast. Matter of fact, I'm going to roll off the power here, slow us down, then come back on it. This vertical bar here means that we are above our speed target. Slow us down, slow us down. That's scenery loading, by the way, that little pause. The water looks great. That's Rex. And look at it, look at the tint coming through that. See that? Kind of cool. Okay, so we want to be down around 131. So that's ILS, that's our DME, that's our localizer course. That's the scenery loading. Slowly feed a little bit of power back in. That's our 3-degree downslope. There we go. Get ourselves nice and happy. And now I can come up to about 17% torque. That should do it. Every plane has got a magic number, or a set of magic numbers for a certain configuration, certain descent. You've heard it, 22 by 22, 22 inches of manifold pressure by 2200 on the props, or something similar to that. So we're trying to keep this bar at a minimum, trying to keep these meatballs centered, keep us on a 3-degree glide slope. Also understanding that when we finally get there, the runway may not be perfectly lined up because it is like Reading, an add-on airport, and that means that it may not perfectly coincide with the nav data. But so far so good. Let's do a quick gumps check. Gear down, flaps fine, cool. Alright, so now I'm going to fly this. Just making small adjustments, keeping the meatball centered. Essentially, that is my flight director. Trim up very slightly. The trim moves faster for some reason on this version. I just have to calibrate my yoke. Watching my speed there on the left. Feed in a little power so I don't get too low or slow. I got a little low energy on my last approach and we smacked it right into the tarmac. This plane is magnificently easy to control now with the new controls. There we go. Alright, it's reasonably well lined up. Now I'm pretending we don't have a decision height here, but we do. And essentially we're just doing this all by hand. I'm trying not to look at the runway, believe it or not. There, now we get our artificial runway, and you see how it's a little bit offset from our scenery.
Plus 100.
There we go.
100. Minimums. Minimums.
And there's our flare
Minimums.
command.
Minimums. 10.
And there we are. It reminds me to bring the power back to idle, and it puts a ground guidance cue right in there. And you see how it says we're in the center line of the runway right there? Look at that. It's perfectly centered up, but in fact we're just a little bit deviated, and that's just because of the scenery. Anyway, that is just a little bit better than our last effort. The scenery is a little bit more accurate. We're once again hogging the runway, but I don't see nobody else here. There, Jake. And we'll keep working on this. Let me know what you think. Give me the big like if you like. Tell me if you don't. Subscribe if you want to see more. And I'm going to keep at it and keep at it. And we're going to start doing this for real in some really nasty weather soon. As soon as I get the kinks worked out of it. But it is an absolute joy. And flying the HUD actually, I think, helps you hand fly better because you've got targets to hit, and it helps you develop the muscle memory and the habits to hit them. So it's a really useful exercise to learn, and I can't recommend the airplane highly enough. And not sure where our next flight's going to take us, but I think we might go to Monterey. And until then, I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.